Cool. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today on this fantastic webinar. Really lucky today to have Steve Nance with us. Steve has a wealth of experience from all over the world, based over in Australia, historically working with some huge teams within the field, including the Rugby World Cup-winning Wallabies side back in 1999, I believe. Also stints with the Brisbane Broncos, some rugby teams over in the UK, and also Premier League with Fulham. So real huge experiences. And Steve's going to be presenting today on a topic which I probably agree has been neglected a little bit in our field, which is the conditioning side of strength and conditioning. So again, really lucky to have Steve, and thank you, Steve. I'll hand over and let you take it away.
Well, thanks, Andrew. It's a good introduction. Look, welcome everybody. I don't know what time you are listening to this. If you're in the morning over in England or over in the Northern Hemisphere, it's 9 o'clock where I am at a beach in northern New South Wales in Australia. I'm very passionate about strength and conditioning. I'm very passionate about helping people and mentoring people. I still do a fair bit of it, but I really am also passionate about the whole general nature of strength and conditioning, and a lot of people get hung up with the strength and power side of things, which I know is very, very important. In the sports I've been involved in, it's arguably one of the most important aspects, but there is no trade-off. If you're playing a sport that goes for 70, 80, 90 minutes, then you must have a big conditioning component. And a lot of the courses run both here and in other countries tend to delve mainly into lifting weights or resistance training to improve performance. And it's a critical part, I know, but they do that often at the neglect of worrying about conditioning. And recently I was asked to write a paper about conditioning being the neglect of the strength and conditioning. And if you look at the American model, it's a strength and conditioning association. The Australians have taken the same model on board, whereby it's strength and conditioning. It's not power and conditioning. It's not flexibility and conditioning. It's not aerobic and conditioning. It's strength and conditioning. So unfortunately, a lot of it's taken, the credence has been put on the strength aspect, the weight room aspect, and I think not enough on the conditioning aspect. And American sports, as you probably realise, are very anaerobic sports. I've been involved in very anaerobic sports, rugby union, rugby league, soccer, hockey, surf lifesaving in Australia, rowing, whereby the aerobic component is traditionally a very big component. So that's why I think it's been neglected. And a lot of the young people coming through strength and conditioning as strength and conditioning coaches think that the most important part is the weights room. And I'm not neglecting the weights room, because I spent a lot of time there myself personally, but I spent a lot of time in my career in weights rooms. But I also spent a lot of time on the field preparing teams for what they had to do. And most sports I was involved in were 80-minute sports, 2 40-minute halves. Quite often in soccer and English football, it was basically 2 46-minute halves, and the aerobic component was very, very important. And I presented a paper just recently. I'd like to share that with you with regard to conditioning. And it's not just the aerobic component, but it's the application to, how we're going to, if we get people stronger, how we're going to apply that to what they do when they play. When we get them more powerful, how we're going to apply that. It's all well and good that the guy can, clean, 150, 160 from a hang, and it's all well and good that they can run 10 meters in, maybe 1.6 seconds, or all those sort of things are important, but the bottom line is how do we apply that? How do we apply that to when they actually play? And so I've got a couple of anecdotes I can share with you from my career that I think are very important to have a think about it anyway. So I'm going to click on to the first one, which I'm pretty certain's there. Can you see that, Andrew?
Yeah, we've got that.
Okay, so I'll go through just a little bit of academia. In fitness conditioning refers to training that enhances an individual's overall physical capacity, focusing on improving strength, endurance, power, and agility. And you probably have to include flexibility and all the other components of fitness. And while conditioning includes cardio, it's not solely about improving cardiovascular health. It involves improving strength training, flexibility, agility work. And the above are really a bit seamless and wishy-washy. By dictionary definition, conditioning is the process of training to become physically fit by a regimen of exercise, diet, and rest. And they're all general phrases. But so where do we stand in Australia? We sort of follow, as I said, the American model, and we talk about resistance training, and we talk about developing strength, power, muscular endurance, hypertrophy. And, more importantly, probably these days, is pre and rehabilitation. It says habitation here, but it's habilitation. So what does conditioning involve and what is neglected? This is my point. So we normally look at conditioning in Australia as cardiovascular conditioning, and it's pretty important. But it also should involve the development of speed, agility, quickness, mobility, which are two words I like to use that aren't in the textbook, and in some cases, muscular endurance. In some of the sports, muscular endurance has been a very, very important component. Rowing, 2,000 metres, 240 strokes, it's a massive component to be able to repeat that contraction over that period of time. And rugby union and rugby league and soccer are like that. It's no good being able to perform in the first 10 minutes or 15 minutes and then go to sleep for the rest of the game or the contest. And I teach a little bit of ASTO level 1 stuff, level 2. You got to think about other aspects. It's not just MAS training, which I know a lot of people, young strength and conditioning coaches, get their heads right around it. It's a lot of other things that are involved. And for those that aren't familiar with the maximum aerobic speed training, it's really speed endurance training and speed endurance adaptation. And putting times and figures to it, which a lot of people do, is probably not the most important thing. It's probably the development of what they can do, not what times they can do in it. So we run the company I work for here now, we run a Cert 3 and Cert 4 in fitness. And the majority, that's Australian guidelines, and the majority of it is geared towards resistance training and mainly weights. It starts with, barbells and dumbbells and so forth. But I like to think about the practicality of what they're doing. So I look at Usain Bolt. Now, Usain Bolt was the fastest guy in the world for quite a few years. He still's got some records. His terminal velocity, for those people that want to look at figures, 43, nearly 44 k's an hour. And he reached that very close to the 70-metre mark when he ran. Now, which is fantastic if you're running 100 metres. But all courts and even some fields, in fact, most fields, don't even have a set 100-metre distance. They don't have a 70-metre distance. And the acceleration component is the most important. So my point here is that power is more important than terminal speed. It's great to be able to run fast. I used to work with the Australian Sevens team, and we always try to put our fastest runners in rugby on the wings, because if they could get a bit of space, they could score tries. But most sports don't have that luxury of having that space. And so we don't get 70 metres to accelerate. In fact, most of us don't even take that long to reach their terminal velocity. In most sports, they reach their terminal velocity that I've seen with GPS data and timing gates and stuff. They reach it somewhere between about 15 and 30 metres. And that's anecdotal, but it's somewhere around that figure. In tennis, I looked after the LTA program. The average sprint distance in tennis is 4 metres. That's the average. That doesn't mean they don't run 15 metres or 8 metres or whatever, but the average distance. And when they put the GPS data on those guys, when I was looking after the LTA program in London, they thought the GPS units were busted because they only had 1 megahertz units, which meant they only got a reading from the satellites every once a second. And what happened was that they thought that the people were standing still, but what they were doing is they were playing their shots and coming back to the baseline before they could receive any data. And so when they sent them to the manufacturers, which are both Australian companies, they sent them and they sent them back and said, they're working really well, there's no problem. And what happened is that they now make they started to make 2 megahertz, 3 megahertz, 10 megahertz. And now someone was telling me the other day they make a 40 or 50 megahertz system. So you're getting these GPS readings that are very, very important, but they're very, very finite. They can pick up any movement at all. And in the old days, they didn't. And my point here is that it's what you do, not how fast you can run when you accelerate, because most of us in most sports do not go anywhere near our terminal velocity. We run fast, but not at maximum speed. And I've done a fair bit of work with rugby union, rugby league. I've spoken to a lot of people involved in Australian football in Australia, which is a big running game, where guys are running 15, 16, 17 Ks in a game, and they seldom reach their terminal velocity when they run. When I was in looking after Fulham for 3 seasons, we used Prozone data. We also used our own GPS stuff, but Prozone data told us that the average speed distance was somewhere between 8 and 12 metres. Now, people dispute that, and I'm quite happy to debate that. It might be less, it might be more, but they don't ever get to a point where they're running as fast as they possibly can. So the conditioning component for them is more important than just the speed component. So the conditioning component to be able to do that, and they might do 30, 40, 50 sub-max speed endurance efforts in a game, but only 1 or 2 maximum speed distance, so maximum speed efforts. So it's complicated. So what we're really talking about here for the conditioning for a lot of these sports is power, which is a combination of both strength and speed. Now, I'll give you a graph here to have a look at. And that's pretty simple stuff, straight out of a textbook. The power spectrum. Now, for some of the sports I was involved in, the strength end of the power spectrum was the most important because we had this massive contact. And in a game like rugby league or rugby union, you have a contact in tackling or being tackled, or in a scrum in rugby union, you have this massive strength component involved in the power spectrum. If you're involved in tennis or squash or hockey, you don't serve in tennis and jump over the net and have to tackle a bloke or girl. It's hit the ball, hit it as fast, and your racket head speed is critical. So it's the speed end of the power spectrum. And working on the 2 different sports, you've got to structure your strength and conditioning program to adapt to whatever the sport is. So especially in contact sports, you've got to work at the strength end of the power spectrum, because you get 2 or 3 big gorillas going to tackle you. You've got to have some power into contact. It's no good being able to get your terminal velocity at 15 or 20 metres. You've got to get as close to your terminal velocity as quickly as you possibly can. And that's why power is really important. But if you don't have the strength part, you won't have the power part. If you don't have the speed part, you won't have the power part. So conditioning for these sports is constantly topping up what you've developed in the pre-season or in the development phase, and you've got to keep it going. You can't neglect strength. You can't neglect speed. And when you do one of those, you'll neglect power. But it's not just the acceleration. And this is where I found some really interesting stuff when I was at Fulham. It's the deceleration. We had timing gates, quite a few sets of timing gates. We had all sorts of testing apparatus there. And I put the players through a test I'll show you a bit with the Brisbane Broncos in a minute. But we put the young guys at the academy, the under-16 players, against professional players just to see how fast they were. And believe it or not, over 40 metres, the young guys could run as fast as the older blokes. This is anecdotal. I didn't produce any of the data, but, well, it's not anecdotal. I use the data within our club. But when I looked at the acceleration and deceleration, the guys that were involved more with power for longer, the older guys, they could accelerate and decelerate well. So if I gave them a 10-metre decelerated test to turn, then they could decelerate later than the younger blokes. So in other words, they could run 10 metres at the same speed, but when I asked them to go run 10 metres and decelerate and change direction, they actually changed their velocity a lot quicker than the older players. And it's pretty important. So here's an example. In 1997, which is before a lot of you people are probably born, I looked at acceleration and deceleration. And I was with a team called the Brisbane Broncos, which is a very, very successful team. In fact, they just won the competition in Australia. And we traditionally looked at 10 and 40 metre speed times, timing gates, how fast a person could run a straight line. And I thought that was good. And because we had so much data on those distances, we compared them to data from 10, 15 years before when they started having timing gates, and it was valuable to see, compare them to other teams and other players, the good players, how fast they could run 10 metres and how fast they could run 40 metres. But when I was looking at the data in games, they weren't ever running in a straight line. No one actually ran in a straight line, just about ever. They ran slightly deviated straight line movements. So instead of running over 10 metres and 40 metres, I thought I'll use 40 metres, but I'll do a 10 metre, as you can see in the graph, a 10 metre left to right decelerated turn, a 10 metre right to left decelerated turn, and then it says 40 metres, but it should be 20 metres there to the timing gates. So in other words, they started with the timing gates and finished with the timing gates, but they still ran 40 metres in total. And this gave them acceleration, deceleration, change of direction, acceleration, deceleration, change of direction, and a 20-metre sprint, so they didn't have to decelerate, which a lot of them would have achieved their terminal velocity or very close to it. And it was interesting to see the differences. And I'll go back to Fulham. When I did this, because their accelerations and decelerations are a bit shorter, I thought, why don't we make it 5, 5 and 10 if they're only running somewhere between 8 and 12 metres? So when I did it 5, 5 and 10, the older guys got far better times than the younger guys, but the older guys got far better times anyway over the 10, 10, 20 testing. So what I did at the Broncos, we had a very, very good team, very athletic team. And so to run 5 seconds for 40 metres was considered fast. In American football, American baseball, 4.5 seconds for 40 yards is the same. It works out exactly the same speed or very, very close to it. So we had 8 guys in the team that could run under 5 seconds. And I was at a club previously called the Cowboys in Northern Queensland, where you didn't have a player that could get under 5 seconds for the 40 metres. So we had a particularly fast team. And the guy who was, I'm not saying the best athlete, but a truly well-rounded athlete was a guy called Darren Lockyer. And he was only 5th on the straight line speed. So I then did a correlation between the whole 25 squad, but mainly the top 8, and had a look and saw if I got them to run the 10, 10, 20, not 40, as I said before, and to see if they correlated. And it was a very poor correlation, because Darren Lockyer was the fastest by far, or the quickest, I call it, not the fastest, the quickest. He had the ability to accelerate, decelerate, accelerate, decelerate, and accelerate again. And he was actually 1 second faster than any of the other players in the team. And he happened also to be one of the best players in Australia, ended up being Australian captain, and still a yardstick in Australian Rugby League. So it amazed me that this was such a big difference. And a second over any distance is massive. A little bit of a second over any distance. So in my work after this in different clubs, I forgot about 10s and 40s. I looked at 5s and 10s, because if we're looking at straight line acceleration, it's those first couple of meters are the most important. So I started looking at how fast people can run over 5 meters. In fact, start from scratch and still start, not a running start or a rolling start, but they start, and how fast they can get to the 5 meter timing gate. And it's now become, in Australia anyway, I don't know what it's like overseas anymore, but I haven't been over there for a while working, but it's become a real yardstick as far as acceleration, because those first couple of meters are so critical in most sports. And you look at basketball, netball, hockey, soccer, whatever you're looking at, they are distances that you can't make up, because you're not running 100. You can't have a slow start and pick it up. If you have a slow start over 10 meters, then the person's going to get past you, or you're going to miss a tackle. And so 5 meters, I looked at trying to get, 5 meters. I tried to look at getting people under 1 second. I haven't printed any of this data, but if you can get an athlete under a second for 5 meters, he or she's got pretty good acceleration. If you can get them under around 1.6, 1.65 seconds for 10 meters, then they've got exceptionally good acceleration. Because they don't run 40 meters, it's not critical. But if you want to bring an agility component in, you've got to have something where they have to decelerate and change direction. Otherwise, it's not applicable to the games they're playing. So my point at the bottom of this presentation, so if we look at any of the conditioning other than weights, do we neglect in our program writing as fitness specialists? My answer is yes. We do look at conditioning as another thing, but very few people today want to improve their speed and agility, but they should be wanting to improve their cardiovascular fitness as well. So it's not just being able to do this a couple of times in a game. They've got to be able to do this in the whole game. And I'm guilty of it sometimes, but we write these beautiful programs for people in the weights room, and then we say, in just in the non-athletic population, go and do 30 minutes of cardio. We don't prescribe what they actually have to do, and it's not good enough. And the point here is we've got to look at, all aspects, but the power component in competitive sport, but to be able to repeat that. So, I got involved in a lot of power endurance stuff. I haven't written much about this in this presentation, but it's another presentation I did. But to be able to repeat the power component is just as critical about doing it once, because we're not throwing the shot put, we're not throwing a discus, we're not doing a high jump or a long jump or a triple jump. We are doing this repeatedly over an 80-minute period. And I watch a lot of sport, and I watch teams that perform exceptionally well in the first half and fall apart in the second half. And again, anecdotally, I used to have what we call the 30-20 principle in an 80-minute sport. At the 30-minute mark, teams used to be wanting cardiovascular, and that's when a lot of the players used to attack. And the 20-minute point in the second half was where they'd fall apart, and that's when we used to attack. And it was very successful. The All Blacks rugby union team, possibly not as strong as they used to be, but basically one of the best teams, best organisations in the world as far as performance and winning. They used to score all their tries just before halftime, or a lot of their points. So again, to finish this particular presentation, no one ever died due to a bad bicep or a weak pec, but they do die about 55% of all deaths from bad hearts. And in performance for 80 minutes, people who aren't conditioned will fall by the by. So, Andrew, I don't know if anyone wants to ask any questions about that presentation. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we've got you. Yeah, that was great. Let's see if anyone has any questions on that bit, and then we'll see what we did.
Okay.
Our social media. Let's see what they said. Which is a good point, I think. He said with the rugby team that he works with, the sports coaches like to do the conditioning as part of their training drills. How do you address that as the S&C coach? And should that be my responsibility to take on that conditioning?
Well, look, it's a good question, and look, every club's got the different models. I mean, I worked at Fulham with 3 different coaches, 3 different managers, you call them over there. And the guy that employed me was Welsh international, Chris Coleman, and he gave me carte blanche. The second coach, I won't name names, he was very good too, Northern Irish coach. The third coach ended up being the English coach. And he said to me as a strength and conditioning coach, you'll do the pre-season, and then after the season starts, you just do the warm-up. I'll take every session. And I knew it wasn't going to work. Okay, and that happened. And you've got to build a rapport with the head coach. And I've got to do a PD day for some coaches next week in Australia. And the PD day is about integrating games and activities to skill games into conditioning models, how to improve speed, agility, aerobic capacity, and so forth using games. If you don't have that liaison with the head coach or the person in charge, the program is going to fail, unfortunately, I think. The head coach wants to make skills better, which is understandable, and his head's on the line. But he's got to have faith in the person who's running the conditioning. And so we do a lot of what we call integrated sessions. So they may do a skill session and then straight into a fitness activity, or vice versa, or they do a skill session with a fitness activity. In rugby league, we used to do a lot of wrestling with conditioning, play the ball drills with conditioning, and they have exceptionally good high heart rate responses. But yeah, it's not easy. That's why they're called team sports, and you've got to be a team. You've got to be a part of it, the whole thing, and it's hard. If the coach is my way or the highway, it's very difficult sometimes to work with them.
Yeah,
I think
probably the other thing as well I was thinking with that is, particularly in the modern era, this whole like load management thing. So where, they're playing games and then they're saying, oh, well, we need to rest players now. And if they do training during the week, during the season, it is very just technical, tactical based. So they're not doing almost any conditioning outside of like the games. We did have another guy, a guy called Afonso, and he was basically arguing that, well, maybe we're getting these issues in load management because they're not doing the in-season conditioning. I was interested in your kind of take on that.
Well, there's two things there. I mean, I know a couple of guys that one of the Australian guys travels the world. I won't mention his name. He's a very, very smart guy, and he's a good guy, and I like him. But he's big on load management. But it's all well and good to have load management, but if the team's not performing because they're not fit enough, just because you've reduced the injuries and so forth, then they're not performing. If they're not, making the semi-finals, or they've been relegated, then it's the load management goes out the window. The whole thing about load management was how periodisation first started. That started, in the 60s or 70s in the last century, to stop injuries. It wasn't to do with performance, and they realised if they stopped injuries, then the performance would improve. Guys like Bomper and those guys that wrote all these, Machevsky and all those people you read about in university, they looked at load management to stop injuries. But I think that load management is very, very important. But I can't definitively say that you can go on the field and tell the coach you've got to pull that guy out of training because he's already done 35 10-metre accelerations. If he's got a chronic problem, I can understand it. You've got to just, and he's a key player, but you've got to be very careful. Load management is a thing you've got to keep in mind, and that's where your model should take place. And that it's the principle of individuality. You can't have everyone doing the same thing. You get older guys that have been training and doing all the stuff for a number of years, and the younger blokes that haven't been exposed to it, they really shouldn't have the same loading upon their bodies, because it's you'll get injuries amongst the older blokes if you do, or you won't get enough performance or development out of the younger guys. I hope that answers that question.
No, that's good. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it.
Any others there? Any other questions or?
No more have come through on that. If there are any questions through the rest of it, anyone watching, drop them in the Q&A box. You'll see a little Q&A tab either at the top or bottom of your screen. If you use that Q&A box, you can drop the questions in, and then Steve's happy to answer any.
Okay, so the next bit I'd like to show you. Can you see that presentation, Andrew? Is that good?
Yeah, we've got it.
Okay, so I did a fair bit of work with telemetry before GPS. I've since done a fair bit of work with GPS, but I did a fair bit of stuff with players and what their heart rates did. So you've got one thing, you've got heart rate telemetry that tells you what their hearts are doing, and you've got GPS data that tells you what they're doing. In other words, how fast they're accelerating, decelerating, what contacts there are, change it. And the good units have got to change the direction. So one does one and one does the other. Without GPS, I had no way to measure it unless I monitored distances, which I did. And so when I first started full-time professionally, was, what's that, bloody long while ago, 35 years ago, we only had 3 polar watches, and I tried to use them in every session on different players. So I couldn't set the watches individually, but I could put them on several players during training, and then I used to sneak them on in games. And I wasn't supposed to, but I used to put a sternum guard on their chest. I'd put a thing over their wrist, over their watch. This is the very old system. And I could have a look and see what was happening in the games, which became very, very important, because only the first half, I'd take them off and let them relax in the second half. But I download that data, and it became invaluable, because I used to overload the aerobic component to the patterns they were running by 5 and 10%. And now I just want to show you. This is a video of pre-season training. And so we used to give the players exceptionally hard pre-season conditioning, and it worked on around about 4 months preparation into a game. I'll just turn this down a bit. Can you hear me there, Andrew, with that?
Yeah, that's perfect, Steve.
I'll turn that music down a bit. So this is where your models periodise. So you're doing this big development phase, general preparation. I still go back to the old school models, and I haven't seen anything better than it. That you've got to develop this massive, for hard sports, you've got to have a period of development. If you don't have that, you cannot expect to get peaks in their performance. And so, there's no beaches. There's not many beaches in England, but there's no beaches in the football field. And we used to take them on a camp 3 months before, as much as mental toughness, but just general preparation. This is conditioning. They're still doing their weights, they're still doing their strength, they're still doing their power stuff. Before we even think about their speed and agility, and that's a 9.2k interval. There's 16 intervals in that 9.2 kilometres. It looks like they're just jogging, but that's actually an interval towards the end of the session. And they're big guys; they're not meant to run. But we cross-trained them, we swam them, we boxed, we wrestled. We took them to an island for this camp. They had to run up that dirty, great big sandhill. And it was involved in their conditioning. No football fields. We worked purely on hypertrophy and strength. The young guys more hypertrophy than the older guys. The older guys, we sent them straight into power and strength phase because they couldn't get any stronger and they couldn't get any bigger. And we monitored their weight and their conditioning. And these guys are in pretty good shape. And we were very successful that particular year. We won everything. We won the Australian comp and we won the World Rugby League comp. And I was just using data that we had not from the games more so, but just the data I had in training to push them. And you couldn't do it every day, but you push them a couple of times a week so that they were exposed to this high intense aerobic activity. And as the season got closer, as you'll see in a minute, we start bringing the football in and we start doing specific rugby league training. And, you see some wrestling, have a wrestling coach, and they're very physical sessions, just like the game was. But we developed this, strength again, 2RM, 3RM, 4RM training. And then when we started to do our strength and power stuff, we started to bring in anaerobic work, tackling sleds with sleds behind them, tackling bags. But it was very hard. And this was the only time in their preparation, their conditioning, that we knew they didn't have to play a game, so we didn't have to tape it for anything. We could just work them as hard as we possibly could. And we pushed them as hard as we could to breaking point. And some guys did break. Some guys, pulled the pin. But we knew the game was so tough, it was going to be that tough. And, they weren't meant to run. The big guys, like this guy here is 122 kilos. He wasn't meant to run, but we knew he had to run in a game. So, it was that important. So I'll get back on. Where are we? So I started putting the heart rate, in the general preparation phase. We just looked at it, but I couldn't set any parameters because I only had 3 watches. But I wanted this broad-based conditioning. I didn't know what their max heart rate was. I didn't know what their anaerobic threshold was. They're the points I was interested in. So I was just playing with it, having a look at. But I knew that to get well on the aerobic system, we had to go, a minute and a half, 2 minutes, 3 minutes for our efforts. And because I put them in debt, you can see there's very slow angles of recovery here in most of the stuff they did. A very broad base work. Did a lot of cross training, very sharp response, which is not good, not what you want, and very slow. This is a very anaerobic athlete who developed because he had to, because he played in a position that he had to be able to do both. And so when I worked with the Wallabies, again, a long while ago now, I asked for a sponsorship and from Polar. And now we've got all these different companies, Garmin, who makes a fantastic model, a couple of other companies, but Polar are the only ones that make it. So I sent over and asked them for sponsorship, and they actually agreed, and they gave me 32 watches, downloadable watches. I could superimpose sessions. I could see how they were improving. And this is purely looking at anaerobic stuff, not anaerobic stuff, aerobic development. And I started to develop profiles on the players, and I'd have them in my apartment because we lived in camp. After every session, we go and download. I had 32 watches, I had 32 players, and we'd download and have a look at what was going on. And they could see that what they were doing. They could see, but I couldn't marry that up with the GPS data. I couldn't tell them how fast they're accelerating and decelerating. I could just tell them what their heart was doing. So I also married that up to a handwritten program that I could see how many efforts they did, what they did, how fast they ran. You had to make sure you kept an eye on their speed, because if you didn't do that, the speed over time over distance, it was no good, because they could have been bludging and not doing it very well and still eliciting the same heart rate. So I lost all my heart rate data, so I drew them for this presentation. And this is a session I ran. I call it a battery, but people call it all these different names. People call it a horror session, but it's not that hard. It's the start of general preparation. The session was supposed to be, you see 5 200s every 2 minutes around the goalpost, which is actually 208 metres, 3 minutes rest, to let a bit of ATP, restore, another 5 200s, and then it was supposed to be 10 100s followed by 10 50s. Now, this is the very first session with the Wallabies, and they did 5 200s not very well. They did the second 5 200s terribly. In fact, they weren't recovering, some of them, and then they only managed 5 100s. That'll stop the session. If we look down 4 weeks later, the same session at the start of the week, they handled the 5 200s really well. They ran faster, so I kept the times. So the times were coming down for each one. I looked at this one, the first one, and then I looked at the drop off, the decrement in the next 5. I didn't worry about these ones too much at that stage, but they managed 5 and then rest 5, and then they got through 8 100s. Then they started not to get generally above their anaerobic threshold. So if you look at, where did I go there? If you look at then the final 8 weeks after, that's 8 weeks of adaptation, they managed their 5 200s, improved times. They weren't running the same times, they were actually running faster. Their depth of recovery was unbelievable. They had a break and they had recovered really well from the 3 minutes. And then they did the second lot of 5 200s every time they got under their anaerobic threshold as a group. Then their 10 100s, right at the end, they started to get close, and then they did 10 50s every 30 seconds. It was a 44-minute session, that's all. And I knew that they were ready to play, and I'll show you some data. Oh, this is just some stuff that so I used to tell them I wanted the shark swimming from right to left, not the shark swimming from left to right. And it sounded a bit stupid when you think about it now, but they identify with that. And they used to say, Steve, how's the shark going? I said, mate, the shark's going really well. He stopped going from left to right. He's starting swimming right to left, because it showed a really slow response to a hard stimulus and very sharp recovery, deep recovery under their threshold. This guy here, very sharp response to the activity, slow response, and then not getting above. But in the same modality, in the pre-season, we've got to have some plateau sessions, some longer sessions, slightly above our anaerobic threshold, and then we develop. And the reason I've got these as geographical data is because geography was my second teaching subject. and I studied high desert landforms, so I used to relate them to that. And I want you to have a look at this try. This is a guy called Todai Kefu. He was a number 8 for Australia when we won the World Cup. Now, he scored a try 30 seconds before half-time against France, and it won us a game. Normally, at that period of time, he'd been replaced. He was only a half-a-game football player, and he was one of the guys, graph that looked like that very first one when I first did that battery of tests with him. He couldn't make it. He actually sat under the goalpost and vomited, and I didn't mean him to vomit, but he vomited and was crook and had to do extras because of it. But this is him scoring the try that wins us a game. Sorry, this is the type of game we wanted to play. I'll show you this first, sorry. This is a high intense game that the coach wanted me as a strength and conditioning coach to develop. High intense aerobic, high in a minute aerobic work, plenty of speed, plenty of agility. So it's all a general conditioning program, which we did in the gym, plus we did on the field. And we were very successful. You know, we fortunately won the World Cup in '99. But you can see that no one ever really runs in a straight line, like I said before. Everyone changes direction no matter how they're running. So we can't just do all straight line running. And I want you to, I'll go back to that try in a minute. This is, again, I'm not a computer genius. I'm still not. I wasn't then. But there wasn't a program where you could do this, but I used to get a protractor and a ruler and measure angles and depth. And when I could get the angle of recovery to around about 3% on a set interval, and the depth of recovery over those 5-200s to around about 7%, 7 degrees, pardon me, not 7%, then I knew that these guys were sort of jumping out of their skin. I knew that they were going to be able to do high intense activity. And this sometimes with wrestling, with running, but mainly just on this test. That's 5-200s there. And it showed me that they could handle it. They could run fast, but they'd also recover. And here's his try. I'll turn that down, sorry. Here we go. And watch Todai score this try. He picks the ball up from on the halfway line. I'll show it to you again. With all the things I've talked about, aerobic capacity, speed, agility, all the things that we try to develop over a period of time. Bearing in mind he's normally on the bench at this stage. Okay, so the other thing I think a lot of young strength and conditioning coaches don't look at is wellness scores. If you're working in a professional, semi-professional team, or even an amateur side, it's very important to have a look and see how your training is going. It's sort of anecdotally, but you see how they're going. And I can tell you a lot of stories about this, things we picked up in these wellness questionnaires. And we used to rate, we only had seven spot, the doctor and I used to run it. But we really looked at how they recovered and how they were ready to play. And a lot of it should have married up to our conditioning model, which most of the times it did. If it didn't, then something was wrong. In other words, if you had a back off week and the players didn't say, yeah, they felt good or they felt recovered, then the week was probably a little bit too hard. And some players were, a bit dishonest. But if you've got an honest group, it's an invaluable thing to use. And so a little bit of history about my career. I lost on my data. I dropped my laptop going to Heathrow Airport. Dropped it, smashed it, and the guy at Leeds where I was working, supposed to copy the whole hard drive. He only copied half it, and lost all my heart rate data. We used to use at Fulham, used as a French Polar system, was live, And so since I've been back in Australia, we used to use actually film the early GPS models as well. And this is a live, I had them set, every player had it set. Yellow was under their anaerobic threshold, green was their anaerobic threshold, and red was 95% of their max heart rate. So it's not semi-scientific, it's scientific, but a little bit anecdotal, and you had to tweak with their anaerobic thresholds quite often. And one of the things that Fulham with conditioning was like we talked about, talk about strength and power and all this sort of stuff, and aerobic conditioning. But one of the things that I worked on a lot with these guys, because I saw how important it was their control, the control of their glutes, their hips, their abs, their upper body power. And this is a couple of incidents of it. For those people in England, I don't know if you're all in England, but you'll see this is a couple of goals. This guy's Papa Baba Diop, central defender, big strong guy from Senegal. He's unfortunately had a heart attack and died in his early 40s. But see, he pushes this guy off, passes the ball, score a goal. And we worked on that a lot, even though he had natural ability. This is Klaus Jensen scoring a goal against Everton. And if you watch that again, both those videos, it's not just passing the ball, but its ability to, in one-on-one contests, get out of the way. Agility, acceleration, power. Pushes him out of the way, scores the goal. They're little things, but they're things that, and here again, he's Australian, and he pushes out of the way too. Well, you don't want to see a shot of me. That's me when I was young and fit, working at Fulham. And so at Leeds and Leeds Carnegie and Rhinos, I had every possible thing because I was working for the university. I had GPS data and the whole lot. I worked with a guy called Neil Back, who was one of the 2003 World Cup-winning back rowers. Good guy, good organisation, fantastic stuff. I won't show you the video stuff. I'll show you the heart rate stuff though. So because I could put on them in games, even though I wasn't supposed to, I could have a look and see what training was like, and then I could see what the games were like. So this is training in English rugby at that point. The ball's kept in play on an average of 90 seconds at a time. And so we worked on the 90-30 principle, and the work to rest ratio was around 2.5 to 1. So we worked on a 3 to 1 work to rest ratio, and we worked on a 90 second to 30 second. Pretty simple. It was easy to manage and look after, position specific. And so we did a lot of our stuff with rugby and wrestling, rugby positional stuff. The first part of that graph there was when there was just rugby. The second part was when we put the conditioning component in. And one of the points I want to bring across to you for those few people involved in ball sports, as soon as you bring the ball in, you lose the intensity of the training session. No matter how hard you try, you still lose a bit unless you structure the game so there's not much skill involved. I won't bore you with a whole lot. So this is when I started to individualize players' heart rates, and you can see there's no rhyme or reason. That's two halves of football. But I had everyone's maximum heart rate, and I calculated everyone's anaerobic threshold, roughly somewhere between 87% of their max heart rate to around 92%, no higher. And I looked at what they did in the game, how many exposures they had. So I looked at then planning the training session by position. This guy only played for 21 minutes, but he had 10 hits above 95% of his max heart rate. So when he's coming off the bench, that's what you wanted him to do. This was the captain of the team. The thing you'll notice is the second half is always less intense aerobically than the first half. And fortunately, it happens to both teams. Okay. And you see I call it the Manhattan skyline. There's no rhyme or reason. There'll be an injury, there'll be a big break, there'll be a massive phase of play, And so you can't just do an athletic model like my 5-200s, 5-200s, 10-100s. During the season, you must manipulate not only effort and time, but also rest, because sometimes they'll have a massive effort and no recovery and they have to do it again. And it's one point that I've really focused on in my career, trying to, in season, changing the format from what I call the athletic model to the game-specific model. Use of GPS, been doing it now for 20-something years. It's great data, but the use of GPS with heart rate stuff is even better if you've got it. So I'll just give you an example about how GPS sessions can be manipulated and not really effective. There's 2 training sessions. One guy's done 5.8 Ks. The other guy's done 7.1 Ks. Okay. In the same 2 sessions, the guy that ran the shorter distance ran 87 meters per minute compared to 68 meters per minute, which is a massive difference. It's about a 20% difference of intensity. And you look at sprint distance, he covered in the shorter distance 1,100 meters, and the other guy, and I know it's only generic, it's set on generic meterage, I think it's 8 meters a second, but it's very important. And so coaches like to look at different ways to present it, the way the training sessions get broken down, and this is the same data, just prepared differently. In Australia, I don't know what it's like in England with your sports now, because I haven't been there for working for a little bit, but heart rate data is not used a lot. It's used now, available with GPS stuff, and they've got a unit that you can do both with. They're using GPS a lot with player load. They're not doing it as much with developing training programs. For example, the most successful Australian rules team, which is the Brisbane Lions, the city I come from, they've won the Australian Championship the last 2 years. They have a spreadsheet on each player, and by Thursday they've got to tick every box: recovery, weight sessions, everything, conditioning sessions, team sessions, wellness profile, the whole thing. And one of the things they have to do is they have to run at 27 or 28 kilometres an hour at least once during that week. If they haven't done it by Wednesday night, and Thursday being their normal day off, they've got to come in Thursday, warm up, and then expose themselves with their GPS data at that speed. And they've found that that's tremendously, anecdotally again, but effective to reduce soft tissue injuries, especially hamstrings. So where am I? That, Andrew, is basically the 2 presentations I wanted to show everybody.
Fantastic.
I've actually gone for an hour. I didn't think I'd be able to go for an hour, but yeah.
No, that was awesome. I think getting those insights across the different sports, definitely something we don't see often. And I think just seeing some of your mindset and thinking through how you analyze the data, what you're looking for, is a really good example of that kind of principles-based practitioner skills. It's not exactly what you're always going to read in a textbook or something else. It's something that you're developing from who you're working with based on fundamental principles of science, but nothing that you're going to actually find in a textbook, and then you're it through the lens of the team you're with. That's really, really good.
Oh, that's good, man. I'm glad it meant something. Working, I actually did a presentation when I was at Leeds when I was working at the university, how much intellectual data you use when you're actually training a team. And there's a lot of things. I mean, there's a classic story. We had a guy up there that was a specialist in hydration. He traveled the world lecturing on hydration. And I gave him the problem when we went away, especially to London to play, how came down from Leeds, what's the best hydration protocol? And so I gave him, we play at 3 o'clock, we travel down by bus and stay at a hotel. when should they drink, what should they drink, how much should they drink, and so forth. So I went and met him the next day, and he said, "I've got the answer to you, Steve." I said, "Great." And he said, "Pre the bus, you should." And I said, "You've got to drink probably a litre of fluid on the bus trip down." And I said, "Yeah, we do that." And at the hotel, give them some more fluid. And he said, the next thing he said, "Ideally, you've got to wake them up at 2 o'clock in the morning. This is before a game, and make them drink 500 mils of water." And I said, "Professor, if I did that, I wouldn't be here now. They'd kill me." And and it was theory behind practicality. It was right, but you can't do that because they would have affected their sleep pattern. It would have got them off, you offside with them, and so forth. The same thing, we used to check their hydration, their dehydration, and we used a thing called Osmocheck. I don't know if you've seen it. It checks their specific hydration, and we encourage these guys to drink big amounts of fluid before their game, because in the cold weather, as you've got over in England, a lot of the guys didn't drink enough fluid, especially when they were training. So we encourage them to drink huge amounts of fluid. And when we used the Osmocheck, it came up as zero osmodality. In other words, there was no urine in their urine. It was just water. So I sent the unit back to the manufacturer and said, "It's not working." And the guy said, "Sent it back. It is working. It's 100%. So I went and saw this same professor, and I said, "What happens?" He said, "Well, when you give them massive bombardments of fluid at one time, your kidney takes the first lot, your organs take the next bit, you get a bit go to your muscles, a bit go to, and then the rest, if it's too much, just goes out in your urine. So what you end up doing is urinate basically pure water." And so when we were testing the players, they looked particularly well hydrated, but they weren't, because they were drinking massive amounts of water just before it. And it was showing that they were hydrated, but they probably weren't. It was a lesson I learned. But yeah.
No, that's good. I think I do love examples like this from real practitioners, because I think when a lot of people go through courses or universities, you learn everything from textbooks. And then the common thing is, whenever we get questions from young coaches like, what is the best periodization structure for this team? Or what's the best exercise for this person? Or they always want the best or the exact thing for something. It's like, that's not really how it works in the real world.
No,
You've got to use your underlying principles that you've learned of science, but you have to use your own brain to figure things out and have a
exactly.
rationale for them in different scenarios, and that's the skill of
100,
the practitioner, I think.
100%. Yeah. So
We
is there,
God, we had one question. I think we did. I think this came.
yeah, I've
She
lost you
said,
a bit there, mate.
yeah,
Yeah,
she
go on.
said, so she said, "This is so interesting. Thank you. Can I ask about load? Do you also take into account psychosocial load?" I think she sent this in before you showed that wellness questionnaire that you showed, but
Well, psychosocial load's really important. Like, I can tell you a story. When I was in charge of the Wallabies program, we were in camp. We all lived in our own apartments. We had our own townhouses, and each player had their own bedrooms. You could have your wife or girlfriend, family there with you, which is a fantastic environment, and it was very successful. But one of the players had a young baby. His wife had just had a baby, and we picked up on his heart rate response to his recovery, because I could marry files against other files. I was looking at his recovery rate, and it was very, very poor, and it was getting shallower and shallower. It was getting, and I went and saw the doctor, who lived right next door to me. I said, "What do you know about this particular player?" And he said, "He's come and seen me. He's not sleeping very well." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Oh, he's got a young baby's keeping him awake at night." Then I went to the physio and I said, "Have you noticed any difference?" He said, "Yeah." He's come in normally a couple of times a week. He's come in every day, sometimes twice a day, because he's fatigued and he's sore and he's not recovering. And so we got him, all three of us got him aside with the head coach, and they actually dropped him for the next Test match because we thought it was not going to be fair on him. And unfortunately, they had to send his wife and baby back to their house for a couple of weeks to improve his performance, whether that's ethically the right thing to do or not, but it certainly made a big difference. So yeah, look, relationships and things like that, you work with young people and you see relationships with parents, relationships with their peers, how they're going at school, all those things are so important. One English guy, Richard Budgett, I don't know if you had much to do with him, that used to be the Olympic doctor. He did that massive paper on underperformance syndrome. And it wasn't to do with overtraining, most of it. It was to do with all these other factors that came into it. And I remember speaking to him personally, but also read his paper. And when I was working in teams, I always put a massive amount of credence. You've got to look at things like, sleeping. Sleeping's one of the most important. And I happen to get to know Clive Woodward really well after they won England won the 2003 World Cup, and they heart rate monitored their players 24 hours a day. They didn't look at anything else except their sleep patterns, how many hours they were into their deep REM cycles, and if they weren't, they got a sleep specialist to come and talk to the players, and they had a look at what was wrong. And sometimes it was something as simple as a lack of one vitamin. It might have been a lack of, they were having troubles at home. They were, their wife or their girlfriend was panicking because they were, doing something on a tour or whatever. And it was just sometimes simple little things that they could fix just by looking at data.
Yeah, I think sometimes as well with stuff like that, from my experience, you don't always get it from the monitoring sheets. So I've used the monitoring sheets, but sometimes, athletes will just put 3 on everything, 4 on everything every day.
Tick, 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 tick.
And it's not until you're you're doing your bit of prehab or warm up or whatever, you're kind of going round and you're having a chat with them, and then they'll say, "Oh yeah, I didn't sleep well," or "Oh yeah, he's split up with his girlfriend and he's miserable," and that's when you learn it, and it's quite hard to kind of quantify stuff like that. But you get a lot of I find that's when you get a lot of good information from athletes.
If you've got a little bit of definitive data and you've got a little bit of data like that, it works. I mean, we used to always power test them, a little bit of power testing at the start of the week, just to see, you can't push out 4,000 watts on a jump squat and then automatically go to 3,000 watts. You can't lose that in a week. So if they're doing that, or they're doing we did a bit of sub-maximum aerobic testing just on slow bicycle ergometers, just to see, how well they recovered. And if they recover it, if they plateau at 600 watts, on a steady state test, but one week they come in and they don't plateau until they plateau later at 900 watts, then something's wrong. They can't lose that aerobic capacity that quickly. But power's the thing. Power's the thing that I find deviates really quickly, and it's affected by either lack of recovery, overtraining, or, I hate to say it, in the early days especially, guys getting out on the drink, not getting enough sleep, and turning up to training fatigued. You can pick it up straight away.
Yeah. So with the like power testing, would that be like force plate stuff on counter movement jumps, or would you do like jump squats with gym aware or
gym aware jump squats? We used to do that a lot. That was our sort of bread and butter. Bench throw, jump squat. Jump squat's more important than the bench throw, but we've in recent years I've gone more and more to horizontal movements like broad jumps, single leg hops, or triple broad jumps, either for speed or distance. I think that's got a higher correlation to power output than the vertical movements. The vertical movements allowed us to get definitive data, so we'd get wattage or kilojoules or whatever. But I've just been looking at a machine that now has horizontal power. I don't know if you've seen that. Just the last couple of weeks, I've been watching it on one of the social media sites. And I said to a couple of companies, as soon as you can develop a horizontal power, you'll get the market, because all that stuff's all vertical.
Yeah,
but
sure.
most of the activities we do are horizontal, unless you're a basketball player or a volleyball player. And they've now developed it. They put a tether and a harness and they sprint and they look at their power output over, not their speed, but their power output,
Yeah.
which is, I played around with it with sleds, just putting sleds on back of guys at different weights and ran them over 5 or 10 meters to see if they could generate extra power under load, not speed under load, but power under load. But it was anecdotal, it wasn't. But I could see the most powerful guys could still run very, very fast with a harness on.
Interesting. Yeah.
The guys that didn't have much power, they had straight line speed, they couldn't. They'd slow down straight away because they were loaded. But,
Do you monitor any like biomarker stuff as well, like take bloods, hormone levels, or is it a bit too difficult, too invasive?
we looked at creatine kinase. I looked at that a lot, and either by pinprick or I work with a New Zealand guy, Christian Cook. I don't know if you know of him. He's an actual proper sports scientist. He's a great guy. He worked with the All Blacks, and I was privy to working with him a bit with the Brisbane Broncos, and he took dermal layering of skin and ran an radioactive isotope through the skin, and he could give a 90, he reckoned 99 point something percent. It was very accurate. But he looked at testosterone, epitestosterone ratios that way, and creatine kinase as a fatigue factor. So I couldn't do that because I didn't have the radiography background, but we used to spin a bit of blood in at Fulham, but a lot of the players were sooks and they didn't like their fingers getting pricked before training and after training to see if we used to put it, and put it in spin it and say their CK level was 240. We'd look at after the session how much it was. And it was very interesting to see. And some of the guys were very compliant and they were really interested to see how much the session took out of them. I did it with weights. I did it with just skills sessions. I did it with conditioning and skills, longer sessions, shorter sessions to see how much fatigue showed up with them. But I didn't ever publish any data, but you could see what the 90, it showed to me the 90-minute mark was a really critical time to start thinking about stopping training in a session. And that's been proven with injuries. A lot of soft tissue injuries happen, 90 minutes plus, even before 75 minutes plus, but 90 minutes plus. In English football, most of their injuries occurred, hamstring injury, calf tears and stuff, occurred up after 90 minutes.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Cool. There's one more question came in. It's a little bit of a fun one. Excellent real world insights into working in elite sport. Thank you. He said, having watched the Ashes series, what advice would you be giving to to England in anticipation of the World Cup next year?
The Ashes it's caused a lot of debate over here. It's in Western Australia, the other side of the country. It starts next week, but all the players that have been picked for Australia have done very, very well on the Sheffield Shield games. They're going on right now. A couple of guys have scored hundreds, and a couple of the bowlers have taken 5 wickets. And the English I watched. What's the captain's name? All the tattoos. I watched him on the news tonight. He was talking about they've had a really low key approach. They've played no lead up games so it's going to be very interesting to see what the first game's like. And the World Cup, well, I don't know. We're as you know, we're pretty competitive with sport, and there's no greater rivalry between England and Australia in the cricket. So it's going to be great. I'll be watching it. I can't watch it all day, but I come inside especially if I'm at the beach now, but I'll come back and watch an hour of play and then go and do something, or go and have a surf and come back, or a fish and come back and watch another. But I hope it should be good.
Yeah. And you gave us a good beating in the rugby as well.
Well, the rugby league we did, not the rugby union. You beat us in the union the other week, and unfortunately, it's England and Australia is very competitive. I mean, I spoke to Clive Woodward when after 2003, I was working with Fulham, and he actually got a job at Southampton as the manager, and cut a long story short, he wanted me to go and work there with him, but he was telling me he modelled everything on the Australian rugby model, but he did it better, and he did it far better than, and now I think, especially the English Institute of Sport, some of the stuff they were doing were way ahead of the Australian Institute of Sport, and I looked at different sports and performances. We've sort of had a bit of a kick in sport in Australia, especially our Olympic sports. We're starting to do better in athletics, which the English have been very, very good at, but we've started at last to something there that they've put a bit more money behind it. We haven't got the English lottery system like you've got over there for our sports, so it's money comes from the government. But yeah, I mean, I really loved my time when I was in England. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed both working at Fulham. It was a hard job at Fulham, but I enjoyed the work up in the north of England in Leeds. It was very enjoyable.
Cool. Awesome. Well, it doesn't look like there's any more questions coming in, so we'll leave it there. But yeah, really, really appreciate it, Steve. That was, like I say, something a bit different to what we've had before, and I think really encapsulates what we're wanting practitioners to be, that ability to look at data, look at situations, make decisions, and ultimately make teams and athletes better, which clearly you did. So fantastic. Thank you so much.
All right, Andrew, thanks very much for the opportunity, mate. Good luck with everything.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I'll catch you. See you later.